If you're anything like me, then the image of an old stone cottage deep in the countryside is one of the more idyllic scenes that you can pull from life in the old world. Inside such a cottage, the kitchen would have been the centre of the house, as it often still is today, for it's here, around the hearth, that families would have gathered when the night drew in and the world grew cold and dark. Imagine a dim room, the night wind howling outside, but inside, a crackling fire, and a deep red glow illuminating perhaps 3 generations of family gathered around it for warmth. Such a hearth was also used for cooking, of course, and so, for this purpose, it would have had what was known as a cruik, a long iron bar with a hook on the end, on which you might hang a cooking pot or a kettle over the flames. Now imagine, as you're all gathered around the hearth, listening to old tales with bellies full of stew, that the cruik begins to swing, all by itself. Maybe it's a draft, maybe somebody accidentally knocked it, or maybe it's Wag-at-the-Wa, a kitchen spirit of the borderlands. But who or what was Wag-at-the-Wa? Why was he to be found by the hearth? And why did people worry when the cruik began to swing? Join us to find the answers to these questions and more in another episode of Beasts of the Old World. Wag-at-the-Wa is one of the more curious border sprites that you can come across. He's a confusing character, one that seems to want to resist classification. At first glance, he appears to be some sort of brownie, and indeed it's difficult not to agree with this label. Certainly he appears to be a domestic sprite, spending most of his time in the kitchens of those living in the Scottish borderlands. According to the folklorist Thomas Wilkie, Wag-at-the-Wa's favourite perch was the cruik itself, where he would sit contentedly above the fireplace once the pots and pans had been removed for the evening. There, he listened to the conversations of the household, where he was said to enjoy the company of human beings. He loved laughter and stories, and could often be heard chuckling at jokes shared around the hearth. Wilkie learned of this sprite through the testimony of an old woman that he met in the village of Bowden in Roxburghshire. She described Wag-at-the-Wa as having
the appearance of a grizzly-headed old man with yell-cap eyes, large or saucer eyes, of a fiery colour, a large mouth full of stumps of broken teeth, and only one in front entire, which was very long and hooked. Long ears, one of them having a hole in it, into which he put this crooked front tooth in order to keep it close to the side of his head, as he was very much troubled at times with the toothache. He had long arms and covered with yellow hair, which was also the colour of his coat, but very much darkened from being so much surrounded by smoke, in his seat on the cruik in the lum. His legs were small, crooked, and very short. He wore at times a grey mantle, and he had his head surrounded by the remains of an old pernie cap, its grizzly hair curling up all round the lower margin of it, which he rather wore inclined to that side from which he was most liable to be attacked by the toothache. He had a long tail, by which he fastened himself on the cruik to a fragment of hair tether, rope made of hay, which he held at arm's length when in the attitude of swinging the cruik.
In many ways, he sounds exactly like what we might expect a brownie to look like. Grotesque, small and crooked, oddly hairy, and generally a bit grubby. His habits fit the pattern as well. Like many domestic sprites, he preferred the comfort of the familiar household to wandering abroad, and he took a keen interest in the daily lives of those he lived alongside, and seemed to thrive on the warmth and companionship of human company. Indeed, we're told that
he was particularly fond of children, and loved the society of men, more than that of his own race, which was one of the principal causes of his loving to sit by the fire in order to hear their conversation. He was said to laugh very heartily at any story relating to that class of impotent men called by gossips fumblers, and coughed severely when he heard of people drinking very freely of any drink but home-brewed ale.
Like the boggart, he was also known for mischief too, though he directed this primarily at the servants. Wilkie's correspondent tells us that
the spectre Wag-at-the-Wa, a species of Scotch brownie, generally presided over the affairs of the kitchen and was also the family monitor and the servants, particularly the kitchen maids, constant tormentor.
All pretty straightforward so far, yet there's something about Wag-at-the-Wa that sets him apart from most of his domestic cousins. For while brownies and boggarts are usually remembered for helping with chores, guarding the home, or general mischief, Wag-at-the-Wa had another role entirely, one that, among household spirits, is fairly unique. He was a warning. While on the face of it, Wag-at-the-Wa seems to be firmly in the domestic spirit camp, the thing that defined him was a behaviour unlike that of any other household spirit.
His seat were by the kitchen fire or on the cruik, and his great delight was in swinging the cruik backward and forwards immediately after the pot or pan which had been hanging upon it was removed from the fire. This swinging of the cruik was an admonition to the family that one of them was going to die, or to be sick, or that one of the relatives of the family were dead, or was going to die suddenly.
Indeed, it is this swinging on the cruik that gives Wag-at-the-Wa his name. He is quite literally the thing that wags or shakes upon the wall. It's important to note, though, that Wag-at-the-Wa doesn't appear to have been blamed for the misfortune itself. Wilkie makes no suggestion whatsoever that he was thought to bring sickness into the house or to actually cause death. Rather, he seems to have acted as a kind of messenger, a household watchman who became restless whenever disaster drew near. This is rather unique because it places him somewhere between a brownie and a death omen. He belongs by the fire, listens to stories and shares the company of the family, yet at the same time he's tied to some darker knowledge. He knows something is coming long before the people gathered around the hearth do, and the swinging of the cruik is his way of announcing it. Indeed, sometimes he would go further than that.
If the cruik swung backwards and forwards and the fire sparkled or crackled and emitted small blue flames and moanings were heard in the house, it was a certain indication of the death of the master or mistress of the house the next day, and that Wag-at-the-Wa had left his usual seat and gone from the house, which he always did before any death in the family.
Now, we've covered a number of death omens on this channel already. The Banshee, the Dullahan, as well as numerous black dog myths. In more or less every case, the herald of forthcoming death is something that arrives from the outside. The Banshee wails outside the house, the Dullahan drives his dark carriage to the home of the soon-to-be departed, and those who encounter the fiery-eyed black dog are certain to meet their maker shortly. Until the moment they are noticed, there's nothing to be concerned about, but Wag-at-the-Wa is in the house already. He's part of the family. He laughs at your jokes, he listens to your conversations, he chuckles at you gossiping about unfortunate men from the village. Unlike any other death omen, there is no arrival here. He was here from the very start, by the hearth, in the very place that you feel most comfortable. And honestly, this is very nearly where the story ends, because Thomas Wilkie's account is more or less the only surviving primary source for Wag-at-the-Wa. The far more commonly quoted Notes on the Folklore of the Northern Counties by William Henderson is itself largely referencing Wilkie, and occasionally incorrectly, and almost everything that we know about Wag-at-the-Wa comes from this one chain of preservation. Fortunately, Wilkie's account is extraordinarily detailed. We're actually very fortunate to have it. These are unpublished manuscript notes that were transcribed via Dr. Hardy and sent to the Berwickshire Naturalist Club, in whose pages only this specific volume has been preserved. I've linked it in the description for those who want to read it themselves. Wilkie's original manuscripts, of which there were apparently 3, have since been lost. Without the efforts of Dr. Hardy in transcribing it in the first place, very little would be known about this odd border sprite at all. This is important because I think a lot of people assume that folklore survives because it's been passed down. While that's often true, Very few appreciate how often it survives because one person bothered to conduct a field interview and take down a testimony, another bothered to take the time to copy that testimony down, and then that copy happened not to be destroyed or lost. And if we're really lucky, the copy finds its way to a publisher who thinks it's worth publishing. The same is true of Tiddy Munn, the king of the strangers of Fenland lore, all the information about whom comes from one single primary source. Fortunately, Dr. Hardy and Thomas Wilkie preserved in this case something even more valuable than a mere description. During Wilkie's travels in Roxburghshire, he recorded a curious fragment of verse from an elderly woman in the village of Bowden, a fragment that appears to place Wag-at-the-Wa at the centre of a far stranger and more unsettling vision. It's not an easy piece to interpret. Like many old folk verses, it seems to assume knowledge that its original audience will surely have possessed, and that we today have long since lost. Yet its imagery is still rather stirring. We have a waning moon, a swinging cruik, and a desperate flight into the night. Here it is in full.
Wag-at-the-Wa went out in the night to see that the moon was shining bright, and yet she was waned beginning to fall. "Go home to your beds," cried Wag-at-the-Wa. "Why do you swing on the witch-knocked cruik, and the magpie sleeps where the ravens rook? Hell's eyes shimmered on you in the moon's waning fall, and ruin's cruel cutter will harry you all. I must leave you now, so heed what I say. Go tear from the haystack an armful of hay, fling wisps in the fire till it makes a flame red. From the embers will rise up a dead man's head. The skull will stir ugsome, but pay no heed to that. Keep hold of the wisps, and beware of your cat, for she'll be your foe with teeth and with claw, and a mewing will soon warn old Wag-at-the-Wa. Whenever the eye holes with flames become full, then is the time that we must fear the skull, for hell's eyes are fiery and fearful to view, and they often change colour from dark red to blue. They pierce like an elf shot, striking all that they spy, so beware of their shimmer. If you're seen, you will die. Your heart's pulse will riot, your flesh'll grow cold. Oh, how happy the man that draws breath till he's old. Then from the house fly to the green swiftly fur, and Wag-at-the-Wa will soon meet you there, as you kneel neath the cross and mutter your prayer.
What I find particularly striking is the way that the poem ends. The English teacher in me couldn't help but notice that the poem's warnings are delivered in neat little 4-line stanzas built from rhyming couplets. The pattern creates a sense of order and progression, each stanza bringing a new sign that disaster is approaching. Yet, in the final stanza, that structure suddenly breaks. The second couplet never comes, and instead the poem gives us 3 rhyming lines and then falls silent, leaving both the listener and the implied audience suspended in uncertainty. There is no conclusion, there's no explanation, only a prayer, and then waiting. Whether this was intentional or simply the result of an incomplete fragment is impossible to say. Either way, the effect is remarkably powerful and an incredible accident, if an accident it is. The poem leaves us in exactly the same position as the family gathered around the hearth, having just seen the cruik wag. The warning's been given, the signs have appeared, and now all that remains is to wait and discover whether the danger will truly arrive. Yet for all the darkness in the imagery of the poem, it would be a mistake to imagine Wag-at-the-Wa as some grim harbinger lurking in the shadows of the house. It's certainly true that there was an anxiety around his presence. Wilkie and Henderson both note how
"It is deemed wrong and foolish ever to wag the cruik, since it is a sort of invitation for the sprite to return."
Wilkie even talks about how he personally had seen a visitor get up and leave the house in which this occurred.
"I have seen a person rise from her seat and leave the house when one of the boys belonging to the family swung the cruik. So much horror had she attached to this invokery, as she termed it, that she wouldn't abide in the house where it was practised.
But it's also important to remember that the very same source that connects him to sickness, disaster, and death also describes him as a spirit that was part of the daily life of the household itself. Remember that he also sat beside the fire listening to stories. He laughed at jokes. He delighted in the company of his human family, especially in children. It's also really important to note that he could be heard moaning in the house when the master or mistress was to die. He would literally mourn when members of the family passed away. And after the funeral had taken place and the dead had been laid to rest, he would return once again to his place on the cruik. How would you know he'd returned?
His return was known by the cruik swinging across the fire 3 times and followed by 3 shrill whistles, as if a man were calling upon his dog.
And yet, despite his reputation for being generally of a good nature, we are told by William Henderson that
altogether there is something uncanny about this ancient sprite, and the mode of his disappearance, for he has passed away from the Scottish ingle, does not speak well for him.
yes, Wag-at-the-Wa is no longer to be found in the hearths and chimneys of Scotland, for it is said that he's been driven entirely away. According to both Henderson and Wilkie, households began marking their crooks with a deep cut in the shape of a cross. This mark was known as the witch's nick, or notch, and was intended to prevent witches and other troublesome spirits from taking up residence by the fire. In and of itself, this isn't especially surprising, as protected marks of this kind are found all over Britain and Europe. Crosses were once carved into doorways, into furniture, upon tools, in barns, hearths, and even on kitchen utensils. They were intended to guard the household against what people thought of as unseen dangers. What is a little surprising is that Wag-at-the-Wa appears to have been counted among these dangers. Wilkie tells us that the witch's mark prevented Wag-at-the-Wa from even touching the cruik, while Henderson goes further still, claiming the mark ultimately drove him from the Scottish hearth altogether. This is particularly interesting as Wag-at-the-Wa seemed completely fine with sitting upon the cruik made of iron, when this particular metal was thought to repel fairies and spirits. By the way, if you want to know more about the fairies' complicated relationship with iron, head over to Patreon, where you can get access to an exclusive deep dive examining just why this was thought to be the case and how accurate it is to make this claim today. Clearly, there were exceptions to what today is often treated as a hard and fast rule. Evidently, the iron didn't bother Wag-at-the-Wa at all, but the witch's nick was a step too far. Perhaps his defining function, his wagging at the wall, was precisely the problem. Wag-at-the-Wa occupied an uncomfortable middle ground. He was neither wholly benevolent nor openly malevolent. He was familiar, but often the bearer of bad news. He shared the warmth of the hearth, yet his presence was forever linked to sickness, disaster, and death. This is the reason that Wag-at-the-Wa fascinates me. Not only does he blur the line between household spirit and death omen, but he also marks the moment of a shift in the relationship between people and the unseen world. He belongs to a time when the home was imagined as something more than a building occupied solely by a family. It was a place in the world, a part of nature just as much as any tree or hill, any stream or cave, and like these places, it too was shared with other presences. Some helpful, some troublesome, some frightening, yet all accepted as part of the fabric of daily life. This is why, for me, there's something rather sad about the way his story ends. For me, it's a little tragic that Wag-at-the-Wa, a spirit who loved the company of his human family, who watched over the children, revelled in their mirth and joy and gossip, was also the only one who could warn them of approaching death. But the real tragedy for me is that even though he did all of this, and even though he mourned alongside his family at their losses, people eventually decided that they no longer wanted him there at all. Once the crosses were cut into the crooks, Wag-at-the-Wa disappeared. And in that respect, his story mirrors a broader pattern that appears again and again throughout British folklore. The spirits don't die, they're driven away. First from the hearth, then from the house, then from the landscape itself. And eventually, all that remains are fragments. A few lines of verse, a curious local tradition, the testimony of an old woman in a border village, preserved by chance before it vanished entirely. When Wag-at-the-Wa disappeared, what was lost was not merely a kitchen sprite, but a way of looking at the world, a way of imagining that the home was shared with other presences, and that no matter how strange or unsettling they might be, they were all accepted as a part of everyday life. But perhaps he's not lost forever. The witch's nick may have driven him from the cruik, but it didn't drive him from memory. Long ago, people once made room for Wag-at-the-Wa beside the hearth. And who knows, perhaps somewhere on a cold winter's night, as stories are shared around the fire, a place is still waiting for him. Embark upon a mission to discover more about the Fae, and one of the first things you will learn about them is that fairies and iron do not mix. Spend any time at all reading about the subject online, and sooner or later you'll encounter this iron rule. Fairies cannot cross iron. They can't bear to touch it. It burns them, weakens them. It breaks their glamour. It's one of the most widely accepted ideas in modern folklore. You find it everywhere, in fantasy novels and role-playing games, in D&D, films and in television, on folklore websites and social media posts. We see evidence of it in the horseshoes nailed above doors, in the old custom of burying nails beneath thresholds, in the stories of iron tongs placed in cradles, and iron charms sewn into clothes. The details vary, but the underlying idea remains remarkably consistent. The Fae fear and cannot abide cold iron. Indeed, this has become such a familiar truism that most people never stop to question it. But where does this belief actually come from? Why do fairies fear cold iron in the first place? And if we study the old texts, can we even comfortably say that this is true? I want to get a couple of things out of the way right from the start, because I'm sure there'll be a certain portion of the audience watching this video waiting for me to say the Fae aren't really harmed by iron, you're all wrong, ha ha ha! But I'm not going to say that, at least not exactly. There'll be another section waiting for me to reveal that this is a belief that stems from a time when iron weapons were a new and far superior technology, and that early bronze-wielding Celtic peoples were driven out by iron-wielding invaders. I'm not going to say that either, because as I discovered, and as you will soon find out, that isn't even the half of it. The belief that the Fae are harmed by iron is a real belief with genuine historical backing, but beneath that belief lies a small cluster of genuine mysteries. Because for such a ubiquitously held belief, the number of authentic written sources that reference it are surprisingly limited, and even within that limited group of sources, the purported relationship between fairies and iron is nowhere near as uniform as you might expect. There are more than a few exceptions to the rule, and plenty of contradictions and disagreements on the nature of that relationship. Still more mysterious is that if we trace the study of mystical properties of iron back through the ages, we find that its perceived virtues and uses were being discussed by Pliny the Elder, writing in the 1st century AD, confirming that belief in iron as a magical substance extends far into the ancient past. This episode is an attempt to make sense of some of those mysteries, to discuss what it is about iron that makes supernatural creatures so uncomfortable, and to explore the issues with sweeping modern statements like the Fae are known to be harmed by iron. I'm Nick, and this is an Old World Lore Masters special. Join us as we dive deep into the mysteries of the Fae and their curious relationship with iron.